Hello everyone, next review. This is Olaf Stapledon's Sirius. I was previously vaguely aware of Stapledon because my friend Richard, who I've mentioned on the channel before, a couple of times before, I believe he's either affiliated with Liverpool University or he actually studies at Liverpool University. But either way, apologies for the wind as well, it's a bit windy here. Stapledon actually studied or lectured at Liverpool University, or I think actually there was archives of the Stapledon archives in Liverpool University. So we had previously talked about him and his book First and Last Men, which is a grand world building project, almost Silmarillion-esque, except that it's even larger than Silmarillion. Covers thousands or millions of years of time. That might be Star Maker. There's two similar works. Anyway, we talked about Stapledon before, and then a while later I had found this book, and I realised that it was the same author. So I was very much interested in this book just by the cover alone. Dog, moorland, I'm not sure if you can see that, but there's some moorland green aspects here, there's cosmic, there's a star there, some sort of... Yeah, and there's, it's just a brilliant cover. It's actually my first sci-fi masterworks collection. Golanx, I think it is. Although that's probably not too surprising, given that I've not read too many sci-fi works as much as I perhaps should have. So, I'll read the book just to begin with. Sirius is Thomas Trelawney's great experiment, a dog with the intelligence of a human being. Sirius is a remarkable creature. His inquiring mind ranges across the spectrum of human knowledge and experience, but Sirius isn't human, and he is tortured by conflicts that cannot be resolved. Probably the finest novel with a non-human protagonist ever written. Sirius is a moving and powerful study of alien intelligence and sensibility. I'm not sure that it's the finest novel with a non-human protagonist ever written. I really enjoyed this work. I'm not entirely sure that it's on the literary caliber of Call of the Wild or White Fang or something like that, both of which I've read. Just on other books, something I want to mention is that this book is an interesting composite of Call of the Wild and White Fang. It has echoes of Frankenstein, but not in a gothic sense. It has echoes of Frankenstein. It also, strangely to me, has echoes of We've Always Lived in the Castle, in a kind of a vague way. It's there for me, at least, especially at the end. These two characters that are, I'll just say, there's some sort of persecution element, and they live together, and it feels like that, especially with the sort of the village and the sort of communal aspect. That probably doesn't make any sense, but if you've read the book, you might be familiar with what I'm trying to hint at there, at least. Anyway, so this book, written in 1944, is a wartime novel. It's actually written during the war. It's very much small scale. We're dealing with only a handful of characters over about 20 or 25, possibly 30 years of time. So we really get into the heads of the characters. However, I will say, as the introductory text indicates, there's kind of a distance. Apparently, obviously this is my first Stapledon work, but apparently Stapledon writes all of his novels in a similar device, that is first person, sort of cold detachment, where an outside character is describing events, not that he didn't take part in, or she didn't take part in, but is nonetheless describing it, and is in some way related to the events, but he didn't actually... Basically, the character in this book is the lover of Plaxi, and Plaxi, this woman, is essentially the long-time friend or even sister of Sirius, the man dog. So that's really where we begin. This narrator, I believe he's a civil servant or a novelist or something like that. This narrator is the lover of Plaxi, and that's how he is aware of these events, essentially. So at the very beginning of the book, I'll say that it didn't grip me as much as I would have liked it to begin with. It's a very slow start, and I think if this book didn't include a dog, I probably wouldn't have been as infused by it as I actually was. Although it did take me a little bit to get into. Very slow start. So essentially, the book begins with this narrator, Robert, trying to track down Plaxi and Sirius at this cottage. And to his surprise, Plaxi is inveigled with Sirius, this man dog, as he's called, this dog with a superhuman intelligence. Obviously, I just read the back of the book. Thomas Trelone is the father, the great scientist, the father of Plaxi, and he has done this experiment on Sirius. So as you can imagine, Sirius is not the first to be experimented upon. Thomas, as the narrator of this book goes on to describe, Thomas experimented on a variety of animals, had various successes and failures, and eventually ended up with Sirius, his peak achievement essentially. And from there, we basically learn about the life of Sirius and Plaxi. We learn about his development from childhood, and essentially, Thomas, the scientist, and his wife Elizabeth sort of enter into an agreement where a sort of almost scientific experiment where Sirius, the puppy, will grow up the equal of their daughter, Plaxi. So the book is really about, it's a chronicle of Sirius's life, and there's just so much detail about how he interacts with the world from early childhood and how he grows up with Sirius, and there's a few other children in the household as well. But it's just fascinating how we get, so basically this account is, it's a kind of a composite of various things. It's from Thomas's scientific notes, sort of filtered through the narrator, Robert. It's the account of Plaxi, the daughter, and Sirius's longtime childhood friend. It's Sirius's own words as well, his own reflections and accounts as well. So all that sort of combines into this greater narrative. So because it is limited to the narrator, Robert, who didn't take part in any of these events, he does, however, know quite a lot about the story, of course. So that's kind of the frame. So the thing about this book is that it's, I think, in one word, I would say dichotomy. That could be human, non-human, love, hate, scientific, spiritual, wild, unwild, domesticated, non-domesticated, etc., etc., etc. That's really what this book, if I was to encapsulate it, that's what Sirius seems to me to be. It's very much that sort of Call of the Wild narrative, where Sirius is, he feels himself to be canine and wild, but then of course he has this capacity for human intelligence. He can actually sing, he can write with a lot of struggle. He actually has a writing glove, which he actually writes letters to Plaxi at various points in the story. He does all these incredible things. He's fully human in a sense, but he's just in this dog's body. So there's sort of dichotomy with him, where he is a dog, but he's also human. And Plaxi herself, it's said throughout the story, is human, but more than human, or animal, essentially. She's actually described as a cat, essentially. And she doesn't quite fit in, neither of them fit in. So that's where that strain comes in. They love each other, but they also are aware of the strain that is constantly caused by their sort of the difference in their natures and how the community interacts with them. That's really how I can describe it. And there's a greater, grander thing as well, where Sirius, because he's so intelligent and he actually reads books at certain times, goes into libraries and whatnot, he he's not satisfied with science. He loves science, just like Thomas, his creator, loves science, but he's not satisfied by science. I'll just skip ahead a little bit. It's not too much of a spoiler, but at a certain point, he actually goes to London, and he spends time with a reverend, and they talk about religion. So there's that element as well. It's very much, I believe Stapledon himself was agnostic, and he was very much interested in the creative principle and sort of love through creative action, I think, and that's quite interesting. That's one of the reasons why I bought the book. So there's quite a few opposites here in this narrative. I don't want to say much more than that, because as I say, it's a chronicle, and it's really about these two lives that develop over time, and they go various, and Sirius goes various places. It starts off with in Wales, and he'll go off to Cambridge and London. He'll do all these things. In that sense, it also reminds me of Flowers for Algernon. That does bring me on to something that I wanted to describe, though. It's one of the negatives of the book. You would think from this cover that it would be a lot more scientific than it actually is. It starts off feeling scientific in the sense that we're given this description of how Thomas would impart chemicals into various animals' physiologies to alter the physiologies of various animals. But then, over time, this book seems much more of a psychological novel. It's not. Technology doesn't really come into play. The experiments that are described are extremely ambiguous and vague. In fact, I would go so far as to say that this is not a sci-fi novel. I guess it's very much in the sort of Frankenstein vein, where it starts off as an experiment and then there's practically no scientific element in Frankenstein at all after that initial experiment. So it very much feels like that to me. Another negative is that, I guess I'll rattle off a few negatives. The dialogue, just because I can't quite, I was going to come up with a grand overarching negative, but I'll say that the dialogue is quite a bit stilted. Doesn't really, because it's being filtered through Robert, it doesn't feel quite as genuine, and because it's obviously that sort of 1940s speech, it's kind of middle class, oh my dear, my sweet, and Sirius's dialect itself is very much stilted, although that is actually a point of that is that that's actually made clear in the text itself. That it's supposed to be stilted because he's obviously a dog. That's one of the negatives. Another negative I'll say is that unfortunately it feels a little bit repetitive at times. Great book, I teared up at the end a little bit, but it's very much a repetitive narrative because it's a chronicle of a life. We're dealing with few locations, few characters, and I'll just say that Sirius goes back and forth between locations. And there's a lot of Sirius will feel happy with his life, and then he'll feel despondent, and he'll go into a wild animalistic rage. He'll go out into the moors, but then sometimes he'll come back and he'll feel pompous and there's a dog there. He'll feel pompous and sort of self-congratulatory about how he's unique. It goes back and forth, which I guess is very human in a sense, because we all feel like that. We all have our ups and downs, but it kind of did get a little bit trying at times because we have these long periods where he'll just brood out in the moorlands of Wales, and he'll go back and forth essentially. I think you get the idea. So that did kind of overstay its welcome a little bit, but and I will say on that note, just about the setting, I think, and about the pace as well, the book kind of dwells a little bit too much in Wales to begin with. It's a very slow start, very much so. In fact, I think only about halfway through does it really pick up, and we get out of Wales, and the book kind of opens up from there. So I wish it kind of picked up the pace a little bit quicker than it did. Really, I think where the book shines most for me was at near the end. It's a wartime novel. Eventually, the war picks up. That has a profound effect on Sirius and Plaxi and Thomas, Elizabeth. That's just added conflict, really. I mean, we already have this strained relationship with a nearly human dog, and then the Second World War, and there's losses and grief. That's definitely where the book picks up for me, and there's very poignant moments. I don't want to spoil it too much. I have a problem with that. I know that sometimes I just blurt out spoilers, but the religion aspect of this book is it's quite poignant as well. There's a moment actually where Sirius, actually this will be a spoiler, so if you've not read the book, just skip a couple of minutes ahead. There's a part in this book where Sirius actually enters a church, and he actually sings for the congregation, and it's quite a poignant moment. There's various moments like that. He spends time with Jeffrey rather, sorry, this reverend who goes around the worst parts of London, and he sort of helps. He sees the greater side of mankind. So I hope you enjoyed the review. Olaf Stapledon, Sirius. So yeah, I think I'll definitely be just reading more sci-fi in general. I think I'll just get back to my usual stuff, just take a break from sci-fi, but yeah, there's obviously a whole other world out there in regards to sci-fi. And I'll be reading more Stapledon as well as Chang and others. So, thanks for watching, everyone. Hope you enjoyed that. Cheers.